All right, so now we have access to the job option pane, so we can go ahead and use it. Now the job option pane class, we don't have to declare an object or anything. We can just go ahead and use it. So let's go ahead and ask the user to enter the name of the name who this payroll is going to be for, right? So let's say although we've set the name here, this is just these are just default values. We can overwrite it using the mutators. Set name in the class, we can use set name here to actually, since it's a public method, we can use it to set the name, the private name here, to a value. So I'm going to ask the user by using the job option pane show inputs dialog. Okay, so job option pane. Oops. Dot show inputs dialog, and then I'm going to ask the user to enter the name of this payroll, something like that. Okay, now we've asked the user, we need to go ahead and have a variable that's going to hold whatever the user is going to type, right? So I'm going to create a string variable called user input string. The reason why I'm creating a string variable is because the job option pane always returns a string, no matter what you type. Even if you type a number, it's going to go ahead and return that number as a string. It always returns a string. If we need it as a number, we'd have to go ahead and convert the value of whatever the user has typed to a number, but it always returns a string. So I'm creating a string variable to accept that input. So enter the name of this payroll. The user is going to go ahead and type in the name. I'm going to use user input string here to accept whatever the user has typed. So I'll have it stored in user input string. Well, this value I wanted actually stored. I wanted actually stored as a name, so that's fine. The name is a string, so I wanted it stored as a string, so no problem. I should hold on to this user input string for later cases, but I'm going to go ahead and declare another string variable and call it user name, right? And then I'm going to store it in username rather. We will use user input string when it's needed, but for now I'm storing the name in username here, and then I'm going to set the value of payroll one object. So this is the object I have created for. If I want, I can actually go ahead and create this. I don't have to actually do this here. I'm going to actually, so we don't declare, we don't create an object until the user has given us some values for the object. So over here, after the user has given us the name, right, we are going to go ahead and let's see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create. Let's see. Okay, so I'm just thinking of a nice way to construct this program. We can do it anyway, so I'm just trying to figure out. All right, so since the constructor needs the name and ID number, let's ask for the name and ID number so we can use the user's values to initialize this object. So let's ask for the name, right? First of all, create a payroll object here, and then, well, let's ask for both things before we even create the object. So ask for the name, which is going to be stored here, and let's ask for the ID number. So it's going to be the same as this line over here. I'm going to just reproduce it. What we are doing with this second line is we are asking the user to enter the ID number of the payroll, or ID into the ID number. All right, so let's say enter the name of let's say whose payroll is this, something like that. Whose payroll is this? And then we enter the name, and then enter the ID number of. So over here we can even use the accessors to get the value stored in the name field once we set it here. Over here we haven't set it yet, so it wouldn't actually make sense. I want to actually get both of these values and then set it, so it wouldn't actually make sense for now. Actually it will be stored in username, so we can actually go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. Okay, we can do that. It will be stored in, the name will be stored in username, so we can go ahead and use it. So I'm going to say enter the ID number of over here, and then I'm going to concatenate it to username. So enter the ID number of username, and then I'll concatenate it with a colon here, and then wait for input. Okay, so whose payroll is this? He's just going to enter the name, enter the ID number of the person. ID number is going to be stored in you don't want it stored in username. You want it stored in user input string, because like I said, the G-option pane always returns a string no matter what, even if you type in a number. The ID number will be a number, so if the user types in a number, you would expect the G-option pane to return a number, but it always returns a string. We'll then have to go ahead and convert what's stored in here as a string to a number before we can use it, right? So let's go ahead and convert what's stored in user input string, because it will be the number, ID number, but in a string format. Let's go ahead and convert what's stored in the user input string variable to a number. In this case, we want it stored as an integer because we define that field ID number as an integer. So to do that, we're going to use one of the methods in Java's wrapper classes, okay? So it's going to be basically integer dot parse int, okay? And then what are we passing into an integer? We are passing the content of user input string. All right, so basically what we're doing is we are passing the content of user input string to an integer. What we are passing to an integer is user input string. Once we have that passed into an integer, we need a place to store it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a variable. It's going to be an integer variable which is going to hold an ID number. So int, I'm going to call this user ID. And user ID is going to store whatever has been converted to an integer, okay? Whatever has been converted to an integer that the user typed, okay, it's going to be stored here in user ID. So now we'll have the username stored here, we'll have the user ID stored here. So now we can go ahead and create a new payroll object, initializing it with the name that the user has typed. So let's initialize it with the username here. We are using the user's value now, so username, and then let's initialize it with the user ID here. That's what the constructor needs. The constructor needs the name and the ID here. It needs the name and the ID, and those will be initialized. But then the hourly pay rate and hours worked, they're going to be set to 9:15 and then 0 respectively. So now we would create an object here, initialize it with the user's value. Now we can go ahead and display it or something. Now the program says, write a program that displays. The question says, write a program that demonstrates the class by creating a payroll object, which we have done here. Then asking the user to enter the data for an employee. Well, it's the same thing. Creating it first, asking the user. We did it the other way around, but it's the same thing. We've created an object. We've asked the user, okay, to enter the data for an employee. We've done that. Okay, we've done that. We've asked the data for the employee. The program should display the amount of gross pay end. All right, so we can actually now that we have the object, we can go ahead and use the setters, or the accessors. Sorry, we can go ahead and use the mutators and accessors, or setters and getters. All right, so mutators or setters, okay, and then accessors and then getters, okay. And then the other method in there, which is calculate gross pay. We can use those methods to work with it, right? So it's a payroll. The person has a payroll. We can set we should ask the user for more information. Okay, we should ask the user for more information. Let's ask the user also for the so that this program is more flexible. Let's ask the user for the hourly pay rate. Okay, initially by default it's going to be 9:15, but let's ask the user for the hourly pay rate, because that can change. So let's go ahead and copy this again, and then ask the user for the hourly pay rate. So enter the hourly pay rate. Enter the hourly pay rate of username here. Now, if we had created the object here, we could have actually used some of the accessors to get the values the name field, but for now we're just using the value stored here. All right, so enter the hourly pay rate of this user. Hourly pay rate, remember, it's a monetary value. It's a number, right? But the G option pane always returns a string, so we have to go ahead and convert it again, but this time not to an integer, to a double, right? So I'm going to use a similar version of this to convert it to a double. Okay, so what we are passing into a double is what's stored in user input string. At this point, what will be stored in user input string will be the hourly pay rate in a string format. We are converting it to a double. Once we convert it to a double, we'll need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a double variable called user hourly pay rate. And then I'll store what has been converted to a double in user hourly pay rate here. All right, so now we'll have the user hourly pay rate, and then the other thing we want to ask for is the hours worked. So let's do the same thing, copy the same line here, and then ask for the hours worked, right? So let's say we don't have to use the name. Let's just say enter the hours worked. And then the G option pane is going to return what the user has typed, which is it's going to be a number, right? But then remember the G option pane always returns a string. So even if the user types in a number, it's going to return a string. We would have to convert the content of that user input string to hours worked. Remember, we define hours worked as a double over here. So we need to go ahead and convert it to a double using the same idea as this. So we're converting what is stored in user input string to a double, and then storing it in a variable that we haven't declared yet. We need it now, so I'm going to define a double variable called hours worked. And then I'm going to store user hours worked. And then store what the user has typed for hours worked in the user hours worked variable. So now when we create this object, we have initialized it. The way we define the constructor is it was accepting the username and the ID number. We have initialized the username and then the ID number fields. The hourly pay rate has been set to 9.15 and the hours work has been set to 0. We can override it with the new values that we've been given here. So user hours worked and then user hourly pay rate. We can use those values and set it. So for example, once we've set the name, username, and ID, we can go ahead and say payroll 1, right? Over here I said payroll with 2 L's. It's supposed to be, actually it's supposed to be 2 L's. I'm sorry. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be 2 L's. I don't know what I was thinking. All right, so payroll 1, we're going to use the mutator to set the value of hourly pay rate. So payroll 1 dot set hourly pay rate. Okay, so since it's a method, it's a public method, we can go ahead and use it. The set hourly pay rate method, since it's here and it's public, where is it? Set hourly pay rate, yeah, it's public, so we can go ahead and use it to set the value of this, to set the hourly pay rate value field of this particular payroll 1 object. So payroll 1 dot set hourly pay rate, we are setting it to the user hourly pay rate that was given to us here. And then the next thing we want to set is the hours worked field, which has been initialized to 0. We want to overwrite it with the user's value. So we want to say payroll 1 dot set hours worked, which is this method here. Sets hours worked. We want to set it to the hours worked variable that the user has given, or the user gave us. So we're going to paste that here. All right, so now by doing this, we've created the object and we've set the other 2 values that weren't initialized with the constructor. And then we have these also initialized with the constructor. So we have all fields set based on the information of this particular user. Now, the program should display the amount of gross pay earned, right? We have the method to calculate the gross pay in the class. This object has it, so we can just say payroll 1 dot calculate, what's it called? Calculate gross pay. Let's just copy it. So calculate gross pay. That's it. It doesn't take any arguments because we didn't define it with any parameters. So it's just going to be called like this, and then this is, remember, returning something to us, the hours worked times the hourly pay rate of this particular object. So we need to go ahead and print it. So let's go ahead and print it with a nice message and say system.out.println and say, let's see, and say that so first of all, let's get the name of this particular employee, right? So let's say payroll one. Well, this was supposed to be. You can name this object as an employee one if you want. If it helps, you can do that. Let's do that. Or you can stick with it. Just, this is actually representing the payroll of an employee, right? So it doesn't matter. So let's just know that it's a payroll for someone, right? And that someone has a name here and has an ID number and has an hourly pay rate. So payroll one is representing the payroll of an employee. So let's go ahead and get the name of that. So let's say, oops, no, that's fine. Payroll one dot get name. Remember, we created the get name accessor here, and that's returning a name. So once it returns a name, this println statement will print it out. So name, right? Payroll one dot get name. Let's concatenate it with a string and say has a gross pay off, concatenated to payroll one dot calculate gross pay, which is also going to return the gross pay of that particular object, and then display it. But once it displays it, we want to go ahead and format it, right? So we can use the system.out.printf to display it. But for now, let's just try it out before we format it. So let's compile this, and we have a couple of errors, so let's fix it. Oh, this is supposed to be double.parse double. If it's a double, then it's supposed to be double.parse double. It's because I copied and pasted, so that's why. And over here, it's supposed to be double.parse double as well. And where else? Over here, integer.parse int, double.parse double. Okay, let's compile this, and it's fine. So let's run this, and actually, one more thing before I run it. Anytime you use a job, first of all, let me close it when it pops up. It's right here. Okay. Anytime you use a jobs pane class, use the jobs pane. Yes. Once you're done with it, you want to go ahead and you have to go ahead and call system.exit and pass in the value of 0. Well, I'm passing the value of 0 in this case. And what this is going to do is it's going to terminate an extra thread that is caused by the jobs pane anytime you use it, right? And I'm passing it 0 as an indication to me that once I test this value to see if 0, okay, once I test to see if this 0, basically once I test to see what value was sent or was passed into this method. So how do I? I don't know. I think I'm mixing it up. Okay, so I'm passing in 0, right? And I can test on this method to see if 0 was returned. And if 0 is returned, it's normally an indication to me that this program got to this point and was able to return 0. It's normally an indication that this program ran successfully. Okay, and it's also going to terminate that extra thread, that thread that is caused by the jobs pane, using it by using it. So now let's compile this and then run it. Okay, so whose payroll is this? I'm going to say, okay. Enter the ID number of K. I'm going to just enter some random ID numbers, and then hit OK. Enter the hourly pay rate. I'm just going to say $56. Why not? $56 is the hourly pay rate, and hit OK. Enter the hours worked. I'm going to say 40 hours worked. Hit OK, and then now it says okay. So I was using the jobs pane to accept input. So let's go ahead and use the adjustment pane to display the input. I was using system.out.print to display it. So let's do that. First of all, we can go ahead and format it, right? Since we are using the adjustment pane, we're going to be using the adjustment pane, right? Let's first of all create a string variable called output string, which is going to basically just store our final output, and we want to format it, right? So let's use the method string.format. Okay, the format in the string class, the format method in the string class, and we're going to format it in a specific way. All right, so let's see. So we're going to now specify how we want it formatted, and then what we're going to format is going to be an argument here. So it takes in a couple of arguments. It takes in how you want to format it, and then what you're formatting, right? So because, well, first of all, let's go ahead and create the string. It was I'll say let's see. So I'm going to use percentage %s, and that's going to be a placeholder. So meaning something is going to replace this. Something is going to replace this value here, and that value is going to be a string, and that's why I put s here to represent the string. %s. Okay, it's going to something is going to replace it. Nothing is going to be a string. So %s, okay, has a gross pay of, now I'm going to use another placeholder, so percentage f. Okay, now percentage f is also another placeholder, meaning something is going to replace this, and that thing is going to be a float, right? And we'll get to the extra formatting later on, but first of all, the values that the argument you type here are going to replace these separate these placeholders respectively. So the first variable I put here is going to replace this. The second variable I put after that is going to replace this. So the first string variable is going to be payroll1.get name, right? And the second variable that's going to replace this one is going to be payroll1.get, or no, calculate gross pay. So now for the string, that's fine. We just want the name to display. For the gross pay, we know it's going to be a float, right? We also need some extra formatting, right? So I also want it formatted to two decimal places, right? So I'm going to specify the precision in between the percentage and then the f. The precision I wanted formatted to two decimal places, so I'm going to type in 0.2 here, like this. If I wanted to format to 3 decimal places, I would say 0.3. But I wanted formatted to 2 decimal places, so I would say 0.2. And you specify the precision in between the percentage and the f. Okay, I also want it to display the value with commas separating that value where necessary. So go ahead and display commas where necessary. If that value is $1 million, display it as 1,000,000,000. Automatically put commas where necessary. So I'm going to put a comma before the precision, okay, in the percentage and then the f. I'm going to put a comma before the precision here. And I also want a $sign preceding that value. So I'm going to put a $sign before all of it, before the percentage, f, everything. Okay, so that's how I want to format it. So let's try this. Well, first of all, this we're not done. So basically, we want to go ahead and format the string. It's going to basically return this function is going to, or this method is going to return the string formatted to us nicely. Once the string has been formatted to us, we want to go ahead and store it in output string. That's the purpose of it. It's going to store our final output. So output string is going to store the string formatted. And once we have that in output string, we can go ahead and use the goption pane's show message dialog. It's just going to show a message. So goption pane dot show message dialog. And we want to show the message, the output of, or basically what's stored in output string, because everything has been formatted and stored in there nicely. All we have to do is just go ahead and display the content in output string. So now we're done. Let's compile this and see if we have any errors. We do. So let's see where it says cannot find symbol method calculate gross pay. Let's see how we call this. We call this calculate gross pay. Did I spell it wrongly here? Payroll one dot calculate gross pay. Oops, how did I spell it? Calculate here. Calculate. Oh, okay. So in the class, I named it as calculate. So it didn't know what it was. So it's supposed to be calculate, or maybe I deleted it some way somehow. I'll compile this. All right, so now it doesn't know what calculate is. So it's supposed to be calculate. Compile it. Okay, now we have another error. Cannot find symbol show message dialog. Option pane dot show message dialog. Okay, yeah. So the option pane dot show message dialog takes in a couple of arguments. It takes in first. I'm going to type in null for the first argument, and what null is going to do is basically center that window that it's going to display the message on the screen. It's going to center that window, and then this is what's going to be displayed on that window. So now let's compile this, and then we're fine. So let's run it and see what happens. So whose payroll is this? I'm going to enter K, enter the ID number, enter the hourly pay rate of K, 56, enter the hours worked. I'm going to enter 40, and now it says K has a gross pay of 2,240, and we can just quickly cross-check to see if it's correct, because I can't just do every math on the fly. Okay, so we said 56, right? Times, what did I type? I forgot. 56, what did I type? 56 times 40? Is that what I typed? Yeah, see, it's correct. Yeah, $2,240. And this has been formatted with commas where necessary, 2 decimal places, and a $sign in front of it. So this is working. Now you can go ahead and change the values by using the different mutators, set something, and you can get the values off from it also using the accessors, get name, get ID number, just to display it, or use it for whatever purpose. So now, but this program is testing this class. It's using the accessors and mutators. It's using the accessors, mutators, and constructors, even the fields in this class. It's not using every single method, but we are using at least one accessor, one mutator, the constructor, and then the field. So it's working. All right, if you have any questions, please comments down below, and I'll do everything to respond to them. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time with the next program. All right, bye-bye.